let's examine more the root sickness of the spiritual battle. What's happening in our country, but really all over the world. And of course, Christians know that it's the battle of evermore. It's the battle of light versus dark, good versus evil. And whereas we at the Hagman Report are very aware of this fight, listening to Sean's notes and some of his ideas gave me a chill, Joe.
Well, let's bring him on. Sean, welcome back to the Hagman Report.
Hey, Joe and John, how are you guys? Can you hear me okay?
We hear you loud and clear, and we are doing awesome. How are you?
I'm good. I have a lot of sound bites that I want to play for you guys tonight, and they're all my sound bites from interviews I've done with the exception of 2, and I will give credit to those other 2 to who the credit belongs. But what I want to do for you guys tonight is stitch together a quilt in order to see the bigger picture of what's been going on here now for millennia. And it absolutely 100% is spiritual warfare. And to better understand this onslaught of terror attacks, false flags, contrived violence down south, and toppling statues that are historical statues, to understand all of it in a better context, you have to understand the history of the spiritual warfare, and you have to understand what the elite believe. And I want to paint the picture for you tonight, guys, with facts that there is a war on truth and a war on God, and it's being perpetrated by the elite.
Okay.
Why don't I start with this soundbite from my friend Gans Shimura? And you guys tell me, stop if you don't hear this right away. Here it comes. This is Gans talking about Aleister Crowley.
Crowley's philosophies have always been a big part of undergirding the entertainment industry, which makes sense now. If you look at it now, nothing has really changed, right? You have the Katy Perrys, you have all this stuff. It's all the same, and it's all pushing the same philosophy. And if you look at what Aleister Crowley believed, man, it is the darkest of dark stuff.
Could you guys hear that okay?
Yeah, it sounded great.
Good. Okay, now what I want people to understand is that it's becoming abundantly clear now that the elite are Luciferians, and they now want us to know it. They're not hiding their satanic practices any longer. They want us to believe that Satanism, do as thou wilt, which is what Crowley said, is benign. But it's the opposite. It's malignant. It's destructive by nature. It's evil to not be restrained by any rules, laws, or sense of morality. If do as thou wilt is the whole of the law, that spells chaos and anarchy for society. So guys, does that not sound exactly like what the elite want?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, it most certainly does. And, Sean, having done quite a bit of research into this myself, the quote that's often attributed to Crowley is really the doctrine, if you will, for Thelema, correct? And Thelema is what essentially underpins Ordo Templi Orientis, or OTO. It's one of the biggest cults in Hollywood.
Yeah, when we're going to talk about the Illuminati, and I'm going to play a quote here for you in a bit. But first, I just want to say that when I tell the audience that they no longer care, they actually want people to know they're Satanists. They want to mainstream Satanism. I have a very good recent example of that, and it comes from Breitbart just the other day. DC socialite Sally Quinn comes out as an occultist. This article was written by Breitbart's John Nolte. She was a witch, and is a witch, she's still alive, and this is from her memoir, who believes she murdered 3 people through the dark art of the hex, voodoo. And I'm going to quote, she practiced the occult in the most demonic ways imaginable. Now, I want you guys to remember that as we get deeper into this conversation and we talk a little bit about Pedogate. But if you don't mind, I want to play this clip, which is probably one of the 2 longest clips I'm going to play for you. But this is from my recent micro-documentary about this very aspect, just to give you a better understanding of who this woman is and who her very powerful husband was. Listen to this. Now, you may wonder who Sally Quinn is. The latest revelation surrounds Quinn, the surviving widow of Ben Bradley, the Washington Post's powerful executive editor from 1968 to 1991, who then served as the paper's vice president until his death in 2014. For nearly 50 years, the entire social and political world of D.C. revolved around this couple, the gatekeepers of who was in and who was out, the elite deciders among our ruling class with the extraordinary power of the Washington Post, and by extension the rest of the mainstream media, to abuse and weaponize their will against the rest of us. Now, this powerful article by John Nolte goes on to say, in my mind, this explains so much. And he reminds people of the John Podesta emails, which led to the revelations of the occult practice of spirit cooking. And he brings up Podesta and Clinton's tie to spirit cooking dinner hostess Marina Abramovic, who wrote a cookbook about spirit cooking, and who is a full-blown occultist. And Nolte writes, let's just say it out loud. The most powerful people in our country are either outright occultists, are comfortable with witchcraft and Satanism, or are moving and shaking among those who are. And he concludes most powerfully, what we do know is that these people have completely rejected any notion of a loving God and moved towards darkness. As I said, this explains so much. Now, guys, I wanted to play that for you because I think John Nolte is right over the target. And we need not be removed from that target by things of hurricanes and false flag bucket bombs. We have to keep our eye on the target. The people that are in control of this planet worship a very dark power. And I'll tell you what, I want to read this next article to you here. This comes from the BBC, and it's titled The Accidental Invention of the Illuminati Conspiracy. This was published on August 9th by Sophia Smith Gaylor, who writes, it's the conspiracy theory to dwarf all conspiracy theories, a smorgasbord of every other intrigue under the sun. The Illuminati are the supposed overlords controlling the world's affairs, operating secretly as they seek to establish a new world order. She writes, but this far-fetched paranoia all started with a playful work of fiction in the late 1960s. What does that tell us about our readiness to believe what we hear? And what can the Illuminati myth reveal about the fake news and stories we continue to be influenced by today? And later in the article, she writes, get this, but we live in a world that is full of conspiracy theories, and more importantly, conspiracy theory believers. In 2015, political scientists discovered that about half of the general public in the USA endorse at least one conspiracy theory. Guys, I'd at least like you to think about JFK and the lone gunman theory. She goes on to write, these include anything from the Illuminati to the Obama birther conspiracy or the widely held belief that 9/11 was an inside job. Now, guys, I'll stop there, and in a minute I want to play a very important soundbite for you from a 1967 speech from Myron Fagan, and it's taken from a recording that he titled The Illuminati and the Council on Foreign Relations, and it documents the activities and atrocities of the House of Rothschild. So please give me your comments on that BBC article, because they don't want you to believe or question anything, including the 9/11 official story. If you do, you're just a conspiracy nut.
Exactly. That's exactly correct. And Sean, thank you for collating so many ideas together with sharing that particular article and the segments therein. Let's talk for a quick minute about the merging of the two words conspiracy and theory. I think it's important that for some of our new listeners, new viewers who may not be aware of the history of merging those two words, do you want to go ahead and take a stab at that, Sean?
Well, first of all a conspiracy is when two people meet in private to plot a plan that they plan to carry out together. Now, governments have used conspiracy and conspired. Secret Service agencies have obviously conspired for years and years. States have conspired to commit atrocities against another state. That's the classic definition of a false flag. You carry out an act of terror and you blame it on your enemy to get the population, who otherwise would not endorse going to war with its neighbor, to then endorse going to war, a war which otherwise would never be fought unless the false flag was carried out. There are dozens and dozens of on-the-record examples of this, including the Gulf of Tonkin and many others. Probably the most recent noteworthy one is, in my opinion, what is covered in the movie Vaxxed, which proves that there was a cover-up at the highest levels to make sure that the information did not get out that the MMR vaccine was damaging and causing autism at an astounding rate among black children, but among white children as well. So conspiracy is just that. It's the secretive plans of two or more people that are carried out. In a theory is our job to try to figure out what's really going on here. And in the case of 9/11, I can assure everyone listening that the official story is nothing but a conspiracy theory of itself, because they've never proved one iota of it. Notice there was no trial, and when they found bin Laden, they killed him, they claim, and there was no trial. They can't have a trial. They cannot allow an open proceeding where evidence is presented, because the official story does not stand up to scrutiny.
Correct. Sean mentioned an important resource, and again, we do our level best to give our listeners and viewers tools that you can place in your toolbox for later use and to better understand the madness that is our world today. Vaxxed can be viewed. Go to vaxxedthemovie.com. Again, vaxxedthemovie.com. Sean, thank you for mentioning that. And this is something that I read maybe a year and a half ago. And I don't know if this is completely true, but it certainly was intriguing, Sean. Conspiracy theory, this article noted, was put together by the CIA in 1955 because they knew that there was revolution fomenting in Hungary in 1956. And they knew that we had promised all kinds of aid to the Hungarians that were seeking freedom and self-rule. And they knew that that aid would not be forthcoming. And they needed a nomenclature, if you will,
right,
for that particular moment in history. Thus was born conspiracy theory.
Well, and it was really widely used after the JFK assassination because they wanted to malign anybody that would dare question the official magic bullet story. Now, notice, to explain the demise of our president, they needed to come up with a magic bullet, and God forbid anybody question that official narrative. And so what the CIA made sure happened is anyone who did question the assassination of JFK was immediately given the pejorative of a conspiracy theorist. Somehow they've made it a pejorative. I don't consider it a pejorative at all. I mean, if you're intellectually honest, it's just research. It's intellectual curiosity. And for those of us who are sick and tired of being lied to by a criminally corrupt government run by corporations and intelligence agencies, it's high time we all become conspiracy theorists and start marching in the streets when we discover we've been lied to.
Sean, that's right on the money. And one of the things, as we just passed the anniversary of 9/11, that's really interesting is the term that they started to label the people who said 9/11 was an inside job, and that was the term truthers. And I thought that was pretty interesting. And then you mentioned it earlier, as people were asking questions, as the obvious explanations that the government gave did not make sense in the world of physics. It did not make sense. Really, if you step back and looked at it, with the 3 buildings in New York City coming down by 2 planes, and Cass Sunstein in his writing his that one paper on conspiracy theories, which I've read a number of times. It's very interesting to see how the media is involved in this. When we talk about propaganda, promoting propaganda, what they've really mastered is the ability to spin a story and to push out lies and label the counter argument of those lies as, in many cases, conspiracy theory, and crazy themselves, the people who believe them.
Joe, it's a war on truth, and it's a war on God, and I'm going to demonstrate that if we can get through some of these other sound bites. And I know we don't have a lot of time, but I just want to say something about World Trade Center 7. For those listening who don't understand that 9/11 was a false flag, I think most of the listeners of Hagman and Hagman, of course, do understand what's going on here. But for those who don't, just Google World Trade Center 7 and watch the collapse of that building, and then research the most recent declaration by the University of Alaska Fairbanks, whose study of World Trade Center 7 over the past year, where they tried to come to the same conclusion that NIST did, that it collapsed due to fire, a $300,000 study, and they couldn't do it. They've come to the conclusion that NIST was wrong or lied, and that building could not have collapsed due to fire. And if it couldn't have collapsed due to fire, then the whole 9/11 official story falls apart. So do we have time to play a 2-minute soundbite?
Sean, we're skipping the middle of the hour break, so we have right up until 7:56.
Great. What I want to do now is just give you a little bit of history, Cliff Note history about the Rothschilds. Now, the Rothschilds own most, I guess all of the world's central banks. There's just a few countries now that don't have central banks that are controlled by the Rothschilds. And so the history of the Rothschilds is on the record and very well known. Now, this 1967 speech by Myron Fagan really exposes what is well known now as the Illuminati. And I just want to share this with folks because whether or not you believe what Myron Fagan said in 1967, listen to it and tell me if this isn't exactly what's going on right now in the world.
Now let's go back to the birth of the Illuminati. Adam Weishaupt was a Jesuit-trained professor of canon law, teaching in Ingolstadt University when he defected from Christianity to embrace the Luciferian conspiracy. It was in 1770 that the professional moneylenders, the then recently organized House of Rothschild, retained him to revise and modernize the age-old protocols of Zionism, which from the outset was designed to give the synagogue of Satan, so named by Jesus Christ, ultimate world domination, so they could impose the Luciferian ideology upon what would remain of the human race after the final social cataclysm by use of satanic despotism. Weishaupt completed his task May 1st, 1776. Now you know why May 1 is the great day with all communist nations to this very day. That was the day, May 1, 1776, that Weishaupt completed his plan and officially organized the Illuminati to put the plan into execution. That plan required the destruction of all existing governments and religions. That objective was to be reached by dividing the masses of people whom he, Weishaupt, termed Goyim, or human cattle, into opposing camps in ever-increasing numbers on political, social, economic, and other issues, the very conditions we have in our country today. The opposing sides were then to be armed and incidents provided which would cause them to fight and weaken themselves and gradually destroy national governments and religious institutions. Again, I say, the very conditions in the world today.
Now, fellas, I'll pause it there. I just want to point out one very important word that was used there, and the word is Zionist or Zionism. It's not Jew. So it's not anti-Semitic to be talking about these things any more than it's anti-Semitic to point out that the Balfour Declaration and the House of Rothschild was the source of the rebirth of the State of Israel. And that's just history. That's on the record history. But what we're talking about here is a war on truth. And the BBC writer, Sophia Gaylor, would want you to think that what was just described there by Myron Fagan in 1967 is nothing more than fiction. But she's not alone, because chairman of Alphabet, Eric Schmidt, recently said this about the future of search and information.
Help us understand, where's the future of search going?
Well, when you use Google, do you get more than one answer? Of course you do.
Yeah, of course.
Well, that's a bug.
Yeah.
We have more bugs per second in the world. Because we should be able to give you the right answer just once.
Now, guys, if that doesn't send chills down your spine, I don't know what will, because if you're a critical thinker, you know there are a lot of topics that don't just have one answer, one of which would be Darwinism versus creationism. There are many subjects that are complex. And for Google to have the audacity and the hubris to say there should only be one answer and we will be providing that answer for all of humanity moving forward is very, very troubling, because there is a war on truth. And if we can get into some of these other sound bites, I'd like to demonstrate that it's also a war on God.
Absolutely, Sean. And I just want to add, compliment your insight with this. You know, it's frightening how in the name of convenience, we have chosen to ask Siri, you know, some random question when you're in the car with your friends, you know, some baseball stat from 20 years ago or something. And everybody just nods their head and goes, well, that's what Siri said. Now, of course, with the Internet of Things and soon to be the Internet of Everything, my concern is that humanity will lose their what remaining critical thinking skills that we currently possess.
Yeah, and I believe it's all by design, and it's what they want. I mean, they do want a dumbed-down population that is pliable and malleable to their means, and they don't want anybody to stand up. And people are starting to stand up and wake up. And I do want to play this soundbite from investigative journalist Liz Crokin about the shooting of Representative Steve Scalise. And in between, you'll hear a soundbite from Steve Scalise from his PSA about human trafficking in the United States. So this is now moving towards the subject of pedogate. Now, you guys will remember, of course, that the elite, the mainstream media, wants no talk about DC-centric child trafficking, which at one point here in the recent history is known as Pizzagate. But I prefer to talk about pedogate, which is the global problem of child trafficking, child sex, human trafficking. And it's a very real problem. It's quantifiable. And investigative journalist Liz Crokin knows exactly what's going on. So I do want you to recall now that it was Sally Quinn, that soundbite we started with earlier, where she in her own memoir admits that she practiced the occult in the most demonic ways imaginable. Now, the charges around Pedogate are that the elite are involved in child sex, trafficking, and in some cases, the satanic ritual abuse and or murder of children. So that's why it's very important to have this conversation. We need to have the context of recent admissions, like Sally Quinn's, to better understand what's really going on and why the mainstream media refuses to address it. Here's Liz Crokin.
You know, the representative that was shot, his name is Scalise. He is part of the movement to expose sex trafficking. He just posted a YouTube video a few days ago addressing sex trafficking. This is not a coincidence. I don't think this is a mistake. So I don't know if you want to get into this.
One of America's greatest values is our strong belief in the inherent worth of every human life. Human trafficking is a direct assault on this core value, and it affects millions of victims throughout the world. While many of us would like to believe that this issue isn't something that affects us, the sad truth is that human trafficking is a real problem plaguing each and every community here in the United States. Enough is enough. This week, the House took strong actions to stand up for the victims of human trafficking, passing tough bills to provide them protection and to target child predators. Let's work together to get these bills signed into law.
They are going after Trump. They are going after Sessions. And now they just shot this Scalise congressman. And there's one common theme here. They are all working hard to expose elite pedophiles. This is why they are going after Trump, Sessions, and people like Scalise. It has everything to do with pedogate. And people don't understand that, and they don't see that, but this is what I do for a living, and this is why there's such a desperate, and there's so much panic, and there's such a frantic, irrational movement to take these people down, because once they start arresting some of the top people involved in sex trafficking, I mean, we're going to see at least half of our government fall.
Now, guys, I just want to give you time to interject before I play a soundbite from former Navy SEAL Craig Sawyer, who I interviewed. But the bottom line is that people, good people, investigative journalists like Liz Crokin, to Craig Sawyer, former Navy SEAL, are waking up to these atrocities. And the problem is that we have a crooked corporatocracy and a crooked mainstream media that are aligned against us. That's why it's so hard for any real, true actions to, take place. That's why we see so precious few arrests of elite. So I'll turn it back to you guys for a moment, because I'd love your thoughts on it. I wish we'd see some high-level arrests of these pedophiles.
Oh, absolutely, Sean. We are so far past due to see some real deal perp walks here when it comes to Pedogate. Now, Liz Crokin, lizcrokin.com, certainly one of the forefront citizen independent investigative journalists dealing with Pedogate. We've had a warm relationship with Liz now for about a year. I know that you and she work together regularly as well, Sean. And then, of course, Sawman, we just had him on the Hagman Daily Show about 2 weeks ago, and he'll be coming back to join us next week as his efforts progress to really bring the hammer down on this elite pedophilia by utilizing media to just make the entire country aware of it, writ large in the blink of an eye. So, Sean, as always, SGT Report is right where it needs to be. It's right out in front of this. I just want to add as well, it was her debut appearance with us, Liz Crokin's, again, about a year ago. And one of the Hagmans asked her approximately how many people in Hollywood were involved in outright pedophilia, and all of us were stupefied when she said that she believed about 33%.
Well, and we see so many actors coming in now saying the same thing, don't we?
Yeah, and Sean, let me jump in here real quick. One of the hot items in the news this week in the alternative news is the story about a number of Democratic politicians from the former mayor of Seattle, to a number of other 11 mayors accused of pedophilia. And there's a list on the Daily Caller, and again, Ed Murray, the mayor of Seattle, is one of them. But back to the arrest of high-level pedophiles and child traffickers. I want to see these arrests, and yes, these people should be held accountable. It's insane to think what they get away with, but at the same time, I have no faith in our justice system when it comes to these high-level offenders. They basically make up and control what the justice system does, whether it's the Justice Department or local, state, or federal police forces. These people seem to be above the law, and it's so frustrating that they continue to get away with it.
Well, you haven't seen the blueprint of our conversation tonight, but that's exactly where I'm going next, because the next two sound bites are going to set that up perfectly. The next sound bite here is from Navy SEAL Craig Sawyer on child trafficking, and it's only 12 seconds. Let me play it, and then I'll flush it out for you.
It's complex. There's a lot of different ways that people are trafficking and harming children that the American public need to know about so that we can stand up and combat it politically, legally, and every other way.
Now, the problem is that, those of us who know about what's going on, we want to take action. We want the law enforcement to help us take legal action to arrest the people who have committed crimes and atrocities. But you're right. The fix is in, and so many of these judges are bought and paid for, and nothing ever gets done, which is why this next clip, which all credit goes to H.A. Goodman for his interview with Florida attorney Jared Beck on the D.C. lawsuit dismissal, who really, this has nothing to do really with Pedogate. It has everything to do with the crimes of Debbie Wasserman Schultz and the DNC and Hillary Clinton. But what he's saying in this clip is precisely right. We're not going to get justice when the system is crooked and the system is built to protect the elite who are trafficking in children. Now, in this case, Jared had just learned that the DNC lawsuit had been dismissed. Here was his reaction.
This country has a vicious, corrupt core, okay? And the most vicious, corrupt people are sitting in D.C. right now, running the show and forming the media elite and establishment that surrounds and protects them and promulgates their bullshit all over the airways.
Now, I'm sorry for the cursing, but you know what? That comes from a place of honesty, and it comes from a place of exhaustion and disappointment, because he and his wife Elizabeth poured themselves into that lawsuit. They came from a naive place where they believed the courts were there to protect the rights of all of us, and they quickly found out that the courts were not aligned with the people. The courts were aligned with the best interests of the DNC, and that valid lawsuit was dismissed. So despite the body count, despite the increasing body count down in Debbie Wasserman Schultz's own district, right? And despite threats coming in, documented threats to Elizabeth and Jared Beck, despite them going to the court and asking for protection services of the U.S. Marshals and being denied, despite all of it, they got nothing in return, no justice, and the DNC lawsuit was dismissed. That's the problem we faced, is the whole system appears to be crooked and aligned against we the people.
No, you're right, Sean. And the righteous anger that people have when talking about this subject, it's like the abortion subject. It's so frustrating to see the ability for these people to continue to get away with what they're doing, hurting children, and in the case of abortions, murdering babies in the womb. And it is again so frustrating. So it makes you so angry when you hear about these stories, and then to see with the Podesta emails and all the things that were exposed from the spirit cooking and all the other things, to going back to the conspiracy theory subject, to call this out for what it is, and to be turned around and called a conspiracy theorist, and basically a liar by the media, by the people in positions of power. It's like they're just mocking those who are trying to expose them for what they're doing. And back to what you said originally, this is all part of this Luciferian agenda, and part of that spiritual power of darkness is the ability to be protected from the exposure. At least there is some supernatural ability that these people have, apparently, to keep their behavior in the dark, and they're very successful at doing that.
They are, and we'll turn our attention back to the occult, and I'll play a clip here from Brad Olson, an author who I interviewed, and he quotes William Cooper here. So let me just play this, and then we'll talk about it. I sent you guys a image from a National Geographic title, which I believe is called, the title of which was called The War on Science. So we'll talk about that in a second, but here's Brad Olson.
quote from William Cooper during his very famous 1989 speech. It is learned and it has been known that aliens have been manipulating humankind through secret societies, witchcraft, magic, the occult, and religion.
Now, guys, I just wanted to play that for you because I think the term aliens is interesting. If you research Aleister Crowley and the channeling that he did with spirits, the drawings that he produced of the spirit that he channeled look very much like an alien gray. So I just want to have the conversation now about the occult, because we know that if the elite are occultists, and in many cases hardcore Satanists or Luciferians, they do worship a dark power. So now we get into this area, and we're not going to get into the alien deception specifically, but I do want to talk about this cover, The War on Science, which appeared a couple of years ago in the National Geographic. And of course, they were trying to be, I guess, satirical, right? They're trying to line up these things that many of us are questioning. It would be the most absurd thing in the world if you questioned climate change, if you questioned evolution, if you questioned the moon landings, vaccinations, or genetically modified food. That's the setup for this next section, because what they feature on the cover is a diorama of the moon landings. I think it's fascinating because, you know, we haven't been back to the moon. And now NASA astronaut Don Pettit says they destroyed the technology that got us there in the first place.
I'd go to the moon in a nanosecond. The problem is we don't have the technology to do that anymore. We used to, but we destroyed that technology, and it's a painful process to build it back again.
And you might be fascinated to learn, for those of us that would dare question anything that NASA says, that NASA now also says that they've lost the telemetry data that would prove that they went in the first place.
I haven't seen anything that indicates the telemetry data is even in existence, and as I said, even if we had it, we don't have the machines to play it back.
But your own research has shown the telemetry data is missing.
That's right.
So let's just circle back to that cover, The War on Science. They wrote, climate change does not exist. Evolution never happened. The moon landing was fake. Vaccinations can lead to autism. Genetically modified food is evil. You see what they're doing here? This is a war on truth. And frankly, as it pertains to evolution, they say never happened, right? They're spinning it because they want you to think you're ignorant and stupid for questioning evolution. This is also a war on God. It's a war on a designer. It's a war on the idea that God could have spoken the universe into being just as easily as a Big Bang. Because both are really a leap of faith, are they not?
Yeah,
So,
that's interesting, John. And as you're saying that, and as you played those clips, these are clips that I've heard in the past, at different times. And who is that astronaut that said that they had the ability to go to the moon, but they don't have the technology anymore?
Don Pettit.
Okay, Don Pettit. There's a number of other clips from Buzz Aldrin and other people making weird comments, and I never understood that Don Pettit comment, what he really meant, because at first he said I could go back to the moon in a nanosecond. Isn't that what he said? Or was he just using that as a phrase?
He said, if we could go back to the moon, I'd do it in a nanosecond.
Oh, I'd do it in, okay.
Destroy all the technology. Look, the point is that the founder of JPL, Jack Parsons, was a hardcore occultist. This all goes back to the occult. So there's a question of what's really going on here. And the only reason I wanted to bring up evolution is to say that these diehards that are in control of the world, that have taken control of the world's narratives, they don't want us to believe that anything they do is bad. They want us to believe Satanism is benign. They want us to believe we all happened by an accident. They hate Jesus Christ, and they don't want our children to learn about creationism. They want our children to believe in the theory, which is what it is, of the Big Bang. So when you guys are ready, I want to conclude with a 1 minute and 23-second clip from the Ben Stein documentary called Expelled, No Intelligence Allowed, in which he interviews hardcore atheist Richard Dawkins and asks him about the possibility of intelligent design. And I think the response from the hardcore atheists is very telling. So we can get there in a second, but would you guys agree that the elite hate God and hate Jesus Christ? They want you to believe Satanism is benign?
Absolutely, yep. Sean. We build. If I had to sit down and quickly jot out the pillars of the criteria that form the Hagman Report, the Hagman Daily Show, and the Doug Hagman Show, it would simply be that exact statement. And we have completely entered Clown Town, where up is down, right is wrong, in is out, short is tall, right is left, and so on it goes. And when I became really concerned, I'll just drop this as kind of random, but for me personally, when I began to get a little case of the chapped backside, was last May, when we were simultaneously hit with the sharing restrooms issue, and at the same time, the New York Times released that article with 30 some odd pronouns to describe, of course, only two biological sexes.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you know that I sent that to you in a little paragraph I wrote up. I didn't read it in my intro, but you know, it's everything from dangerous vaccines that we must not question to new legislation being introduced in California and in Canada that will criminalize people for using the wrong gender pronouns. And, you know, it reminds me of the warning that we received that the Department of Justice is trying to normalize 12 perversions, 2 of which are bestiality and pedophilia. So this is the roadmap that Myron Fagan described. Whether or not you believe what he said is fiction or truth, half and half, we see this roadmap now clearly being not even a roadmap, it's a strategy that's being executed. It's a divide and conquer strategy. And not only is it a divide and conquer strategy to separate us into groups that fight with each other, it's a divide and conquer strategy to separate us from our Creator and from the knowledge of who we really are and how beautiful creation really is. Because if you believe this is all an accident, if you believe it all happened, you know, per chance by the Big Bang, if you think that God doesn't love us, and if you think there's no beauty in design, you're more apt to want to destroy that design. You're more apt to act like a Satanist. You're more apt to treat your neighbors as do as thou wilt. Take advantage of your neighbor. Steal from your neighbor. That's the problem. And that's who these people are. At their heart and soul, they hate God, they hate creation, and by virtue of that, they hate us. They hate humanity because we were created in God's image.
And there it is. And you know, as I listened to your remarks, Sean, I began to wonder, 6 or 7 years ago, when I personally began to integrate into this new media community, there was still an effort made. And you know, my background, I worked in Hollywood for 16 years, and there was still an effort made to keep a thin veil over the Luciferian lizard faces that were running Hollywood. But since then, that veil is gone, and any pretense is gone with it. And I have a question for you, Sean. Do you think that from Antifa, by any means necessary, on through to the Democratic Party, the biotech producers of GMO foods, those who would fluoridate our water, if you take all the bad guys and lump them together, is it not possible that we've reached a moment in time in this Trump presidency where they feel they've got the numbers? The churches are weak. The right is so fiercely independent, we can't get it together and fight back. We have hundreds of these smaller platforms. We help each other out as much as we can, but we lack massively amplified platforms to really blare back at the left and all of their fake news narrative. Sean, maybe they just finally figure, we've got the numbers. Let's do it.
Well, they do have their media platform, unfortunately, and it's very powerful because I don't know about you guys, but many people that we know, friends and family, people we work with, you know, are not awake to this stuff. And at this point, it's just so obvious about what happened on 9/11 that really, if you can't figure that one out, how in the world are you supposed to understand the big picture that I've just shared with you? And that's the problem. And you're right. There's many of us in the truth media that are speaking truth and screaming it from the rooftops, but our venues are small in comparison to the reach of 6 corporations which disseminate 90% of the information that the American people digest. And that's the problem. We're a small, disparate group. And frankly, they love to yank our chain all the time with, you know, one minute we're on vaccines and the next minute we're talking about a bucket bomb. So they love to whipsaw us with the stuff that they orchestrate, whether it's, you know, geoengineered and steered hurricanes or a bucket bomb. That's why I wanted to come on tonight and try to present a big picture, because the big picture is the war on truth and the war on God. And it is at its heart spiritual warfare. And if there's nothing else that comes from this, I hope that somebody listening turns to Christ, because that is where you need to go. There is no more truth on this planet than the word of Jesus Christ, and it's not something I typically evangelize about. But when you go down this rabbit hole, you realize that the people aligned against us, these occultists like Sally Quinn, hate God. And John Nolte at Breitbart got it right. They have turned their backs on God, and they have turned to darkness. Okay, so don't take it from me. I'm just a guy with a blog and a YouTube channel. Take it from John Nolte, a respected reporter at Breitbart. Okay, these people have turned their backs on God. And I think this is a good segue to Ben Stein's Expelled, No Intelligence Allowed, which is a movie about the freedom of speech, suppression to which intelligent design proponents are being subjected to by the atheistic American academic dictatorship. So in this movie, Expelled, there's a 1 minute, 23-second clip. Ben Stein interviews atheist scientist Richard Dawkins and asks him about intelligent design. And his response, I think, is extremely telling.
What do you think is the possibility that intelligent design might turn out to be the answer to some issues in genetics or in evolution?
It could come about in the following way. It could be that at some earlier time, somewhere in the universe, a civilization evolved by probably some kind of Darwinian means to a very, very high level of technology and designed a form of life that they seeded onto perhaps this planet. Now, that is a possibility and an intriguing possibility. And I suppose it's possible that you might find evidence for that if you look at the details of biochemistry, molecular biology. You might find a signature of some sort of designer.
Wait a second. Richard Dawkins thought intelligent design might be a legitimate pursuit?
And that designer could well be a higher intelligence from elsewhere in the universe. Well, but that higher intelligence would itself have had to have come about by some explicable or ultimately explicable process. It couldn't have just jumped into existence spontaneously. That's the point.
So Professor Dawkins was not against intelligent design, just certain types of designers, such as God.
It couldn't have jumped into existence spontaneously. But that's what Darwinism says happened. So when you get to the core of even the beliefs of the strictest atheist scientists, you find that they cannot explain the beauty of humanity and the beauty of creation. So much so that in that hour, in that minute of his distress during that interview, he had to concede that it's possible that some other civilization that came about by Darwinian means, of course, but he just said that can't happen, seeded life on this planet. So he's actually referring to alien species. Instead of having the humility to get on his knees and say, there is a signature of a designer. They found it in the DNA. They found it. The smaller they go on a molecular quantum level, the more complex creation is. So there is a signature of a designer. He knows it, but he is too hubris-filled and he lacks humility. He would rather tell the audience and tell Ben Stein that it's more possible that aliens seeded us here than God created us. So these people are aligned against God and they're aligned against truth, because I did a whole interview with James Perloff about two of his books, and Tornado in a Junkyard being one of them. And the whole Darwinian science is junk science. It's absolute junk science. And people like this guy, Richard Dawkins, continue to cling to it as though it's the Bible. And I assure you it's not.
It's just like the Ancient Alien show. They take all the biblical stories out of context and just replace God with aliens. And as you said, they're so willing to say that we were created, but not by God. They refuse to go there. And what's interesting is the how you broke down that clip of Dawkins there, and you pointed out exactly the flaw in his argument. And he basically says the same thing. And as you rightly pointed out, the hubris, the level of pride and arrogance there. These people do hate God. They do hate Jesus, and they hate anybody who believes in it. That's why you see the religion of Islam, being given the red carpet compared to Christianity, and Christianity is just torn apart each and every way in the public that it can be. Sean, thank you so much for joining us tonight. That's a fantastic interview that you just gave with tons of great information. Thank you so much.
I believe that in the truth movement, we actually have been using a somewhat misleading phrase. It's the meme, 9/11 was an inside job. And I think it would be more correct to say that 9/11 was an outside job done by Israeli operatives, but with the cooperation and consent at the highest levels of the U.S. government.